Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Autonomia, the show where we bring ideas from the libertarian left to everyday people and foster conversation on what we believe in hopes of proving that we all have far more in common than we are trained to believe. My name is Hayward, and I am your host. As always, our intro and outro music come from a song called A Bigger Cage is Still a Prison by System Failure. If you'd like to look up this song, the band spells System, C-I-S-T-E-M, for political reasons.
There's nothing I want more than to sleep under the night sky, hear the animals as they go about their lives, feel the fire warm my body, feel the mud under my toes, but tonight this cell keeps me enclosed.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for yet again tuning in. You may notice that the audio quality still sounds pretty terrible. And despite the fact that a generous supporter of mine sent me a real fancy, at least by the standards that I'm used to, a very fancy microphone, I still have yet to figure out how to make it work with my computer. It could be that the computer is 12 years old and very out of date, but for whatever reason, it's not currently reading in my audio recording software. It keeps giving it an error message of some kind. So, until I get that figured out, we're still recording on the old iPhone. Anyway, I'm going to bring another conversation from the radio to you because I think these conversations need to have a bigger audience, or I should say, have more avenues to get to the public, because naturally, comparatively speaking, my audience is negligible. But this is an instance where I can, take 4 hours of a show and say this conversation is one that we had that I think is very important to continue. So this is about gardening, of all things, and what anarchists might think about gardening. We have this reputation for being a bunch of bomb-throwing lunatics or dangerous psychopaths, and, maybe. But there's more to it. There really is. In fact, one of my friends said, "You anarchists are such a disappointment. All you do is talk about gardening." And, to some extent that's true, because you want to be able to feed the new world that you're creating. You want to be able to have an infrastructure for keeping your new world alive. And until we figure out how to replace ourselves with cyborg parts, we still have to eat. So, got to figure that one out. I'm actually pretty proud of this conversation, and despite the fact that there are probably a couple of factual errors here and there, because no one's perfect, me especially, I think it's really gets to the idea, very much at the core of what people like me are trying to do in this world, to create something better and to undo the foundational theft that allowed this culture to metastasize to the planet. It all starts with food, at least as far as I'm concerned, because without food, you've got nothing. So I hope you find this conversation interesting, and maybe it inspires you to go out and pop a tree in the ground, because like I say in the show with Lee, if you've got a yard, why haven't you put a fruit tree in it? Bare minimum. They cost like between $30 and $50, and I get it. That's expensive, at least for people like me it is. But the long-term benefit is incredible. So I really hope you find it interesting, and enjoy. Have a great day.
So I'm excited about this next segment. Our friend, our anarchist friend of the show, Hayward, has come in here, and he laughs, but he likes that. He thinks he's, he knows he is, sort of pushing back against the societal norms. But Hayward is here with us today. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Exhaustedly. How about you?
Yeah, you told me about your wife tried to kill you yesterday. Is that what it is?
Yeah, a lot of...
Get used to it.
Hey, there it is, So, I'm alive today after my heart almost exploding
Yeah.
from too much matcha. But anyway,
So I want to ask you about that because I had every once in a while, I don't know what it is. Like I can drink, like sometimes I used to be able to drink 4 or 5 cups of coffee or teas a day, nothing. And then now, as I've gotten to a certain age, I guess, like there is a limit. Once I hit that limit, man, I tell you, there's nothing more scary than when your heart is pumping like 1,000 miles an hour.
yeah. Turns out putting chemicals in your body isn't always the best move.
No.
Sometimes just sleeping. But
Yeah.
tricky thing with our society is
Yeah.
sometimes sleeping is a little bit difficult.
Yeah. All right, so you wanted to talk today, at least in the beginning. And by the way, if you want to talk to Hayward, he's here, 860-464-9490. Sort of have this like be a free range open segment. We'll have him till the bottom of the hour. But you wanted to talk about like the old time victory gardens.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's really interesting how you started the show because you were talking about a lot of the difficulties and frankly horrors of history on the left edge of things. And I come from the left as well, but from a very opposite end of the left. A long time ago, a bunch of people said, "Well, we're really not liking the workhouses and the mines and all of these things that began to go all over the world when capitalism started." And some folks said, well, we need to seize state power and make our own giant bureaucracy, and somehow that will liberate us. And other folks said, well, maybe that's not the best idea. One of the people that was sort of the founders of traditional anarchist thought once said something to the effect of, well, if there's a boot standing on your face, you don't really care if it's called the people's boot. Maybe just don't step on people's faces. And so I come from a very different end of the political spectrum that is critical of these dynamics around capitalism. And one of the big things that we talk about is the initial separation and forced separation of people from the ability to subsist, or at least partially subsist, off of the land, because it's a lot easier to force people into factories if they're not allowed to grow food anymore. And in times of crisis and difficulty, we've been forced to re-recognize that kinship with nature that we're supposed to have. So World War II, difficult time for pretty much everyone. America got off a little bit better, but we had rationing. We had things be expensive. And so the government said, well, let's do this thing called the Victory Garden. We had this animating power at the time saying we need to beat the Germans, avenge Pearl Harbor, win this war, liberate the world, that sort of thing. And sometimes a lot of belt tightening had to happen. And that's sort of like what we have happening now. So they said we need to encourage people to bring the food sourcing locally because the system is under strain. We need to encourage people to be empowered to make sure they don't have to spend this money and to offset all of the materials being used for the war effort. Now, things are a little bit different now, but we have things like inflation. We have things like the cost of living skyrocketing. We have things like 60-something% of Americans right now are living paycheck to paycheck, and that's up from 42% in 2021. Life is hard. Life is expensive. And, from my end of the political perspective, the crisis is now. The crisis is always. And so how do we offset that? It seems like realistically a revolution of any kind is quite far away. And if you look at Syria, you can see a revolution yielding something good, or it can yield a group like ISIS. That's always a mixed bag. So what do we do in this time right now where things are hard? Well, I don't know about you folks, but I like to eat. I really do enjoy it. And what I don't enjoy is having to work more hours to feed myself. So how can I do that without relying on a large state structure to feed me? Because there's a certain ethical entanglement, like you folks talked about at the beginning with Mike France, of saying, well, I don't want to go to this job, so you have to feed me. There's a certain obvious ethical entanglement there. But there's another way. There's a way of engaging with the world around you, and probably most of you have yards of one kind or another. And how much expense could you offset if you started to use that space that you have, which is literally just leaving money on the table to start to produce for you? Over half of my yard is edible. My children learned how to forage before they learned how to speak, and kids are expensive enough already. So having edible organic stuff just growing in the yard, especially with perennials that just do the thing year after year rather than having to plant them constantly, that's incredibly liberating. And, this is that victory garden. For folks like me, it's more of a resistance garden. It's a lot easier to challenge the system if you're not relying upon it for staying alive.
Right.
And so, you folks that have yards, Lee, I know you have a yard. You talk about it on the show.
I have a yard.
Why don't you have a $30 apple tree stuck in the ground?
That's a good point.
Like why don't we do this? Think about Americans spend some ungodly amount of billions of dollars per year. It's $48 billion per year on lawn care. Like, what are you doing? Like, lawns are cool, but like my lawn is edible. My lawn.
Well, I'm getting people. No, this is great. I'm getting people are asking me what's in your quote unquote victory garden. I get a lot of folks who want to know what you got planted.
Yeah. So there are a ton, and I mean a ton, of hardy fruit and nut-bearing trees around here. People have this idea we're in the Great White North. We can't grow stuff. Well,
that's what I thought. To be honest with you.
Most people don't realize you can grow peaches in New England.
Okay.
They have hardy varieties of these things, and now people are putting a lot of effort into this because, again, folks are realizing food's expensive. Maybe I can offset that somehow. Spend $50 on a tree and eat it for like the next 50 years.
What kind of tree? What kind of apple tree will grow here? Any kind?
Pretty much. I
Really?
mean, I'm sure they have some varieties that are tropical only, but bringing up tropical, the natives that lived here before us and still to some degree live here now figured out these ways of relating to nature and actually brought up through selective breeding and just adapting it over time. The only tropical fruit tree that can grow in this area is called the pawpaw. It's also known as the hillbilly mango. And you can grow them around here. And before this whole place was denuded twice because our trees make good masts for the British Navy, before we chopped all that down, there was this very advanced blending of the natural world to create that abundance. How did these people survive without a massive industrial apparatus? They knew how to utilize the land around them. Or something like the American groundnut. It's basically like a little peanut. And I got 3 of them about 2 years ago, and now an entire portion of my yard is covered in those vines. And if I want peanuts, I can just stick a shovel in the ground, pry it back, and have handfuls of them. Same thing with potatoes.
Wait a second. Say that again about peanuts?
It's called the American groundnut, and you can basically think of it as a cousin of a peanut.
Okay.
And it grows through vines, but underground it has these little tubers that are growing all over the place. This is stuff that cost me like a couple of dollars. And in the era where I was incredibly poor, I was living off of dumpster diving because, again, I didn't want to be that person that's just stealing from other people in order to feed myself. These are things that were thrown away.
Right.
And there are the great-great-great-grandchildren of potatoes I found in the trash that are now growing wild in my yard. And these are things that people can do.
How do you keep up with, because I know there's got to be you have to have some kind of a green thumb to cultivate this stuff, don't you?
I mean, sure, to some degree it obviously can help, but that's the thing with, something like 40% of Americans in 1900 used to live on farms or around them in some way. Now that number is less than 1%, so we've lost this knowledge, and that is much to our detriment. Like, I don't care where you are in the political spectrum. I want you to be able to eat because that creates a better and healthier world for all of us. And, again, bringing politics into it from sort of an anti-fascist perspective, the ability to eat and feed yourself is really powerful when warding off the promises of demagogues. Why did Hitler rise to power? Because folks in Weimar Germany were starving and said, I'll get you out. What can independent and strong people do of saying, I don't need your silly lies? And that goes to politicians on any side. I don't need you anymore. That is so powerful. And regardless of where you are politically, that just helps. Like, whenever I talk about this, yes, it's political for me, but it's also just a good idea, Lee.
Can you survive on your own property?
Absolutely.
Without question.
Yeah.
So you have what? You have nuts,
we have berries, we have fruit trees, we have all of these tubers growing, we grow greens all year round. So the brassica family is like Swiss chard and kale and turnips and broccoli and all that kind of stuff. These plants you wouldn't think are necessarily related, but they have a common ancestor. It's like some kind of a mustard plant. They're really, really good at surviving even in our winters. So what I'll do is I have fish tanks that I found at the dump or at yard sales, and I put them on top of the plants, and all winter long, they're still growing. And I have a greenhouse, but I understand, for most of you, building a greenhouse, especially a passive solar, fully insulated design, is a big ask. But like it's easy to find a fish tank at a yard sale, and you just put it on your plants. Even a Mediterranean crop like rosemary, which, I can't live off rosemary, but it makes my food taste better. I just put a fish tank on it, and all winter long it was green.
All right. Hayward Gatch is with us. Interesting stuff. All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll come right back. We'll spend a little bit more time with him. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to 94.9 News Now. Stimulating talk.
You're listening to Lee Elci, tough but fair, on 94.9 News Now and Stimulating Talk.
So our pal Hayward Gatch is with us in the studio, and we're talking about essentially the Victory Garden, and I didn't realize how much he had at his house. He's got like basically a whole farm over there, which is good. So, you were talking off the air about how to keep your soil healthy. How would you recommend folks do that?
Yeah, so one of the big things that we as gardeners deal with is making sure the soil is healthy, and a big part of that is nitrogen. And a lot of extractive farming practices have a tendency to sort of wear down the soil over time. But there are plants out there called nitrogen fixers, and what they literally do is to suck nitrogen out of the air. Air isn't just straight oxygen. It's something like 70% nitrogen, 20% oxygen, 3%, 5% argon, 5% trace gases, some number like that. I didn't remember atmospheric chemistry off the top of my head, but it's something like that. And so these plants pull nitrogen out of the air and deposit it into the soil through their roots. Things like, Lee, beans.
Ooh, beans.
And the cool thing about beans, and important to being like a big facet of protein, you as a vegetarian would know the importance of beans, they're a nitrogen fixer. This particular variety I have here was found in a clay pot in New Mexico.
Yeah.
And it was dated to 1,500 years old, and they brought back the strain because they put them in the ground and they sprouted. So every one of these little dry beans is a descendant of something someone found, and it sat in a pot for 1,500 years.
Wow.
I'm not planning on living that long. I know you are.
Yes.
But that's the kind of thing where these are seeds.
Yeah.
You can put them in the ground and they make more. And the cool thing is they make more beans.
Right.
So, and I know this is a generally more right-leaning audience, so I know we're still doing the culture war, so I have Goya as well, because we know Goya is the one to go for if you're on the right.
Yeah.
You can buy these for a couple bucks in a store.
Right.
I do this too. Literally every one of those is the potential for a bean plant yielding like 50, 60 beans. Right, because that's what plants are.
Okay.
They're seeds. You stick them in the ground and they grow.
Right.
It's like magic, but it's real.
So you buy the Goya beans, you plant them, and now you've got so you got a whole Okay.
So like I literally say, okay, I've purchased at the time a $1 or so bag of Goya beans.
Yep.
Throw them on the ground.
Yep.
Most of them germinate. Most of them yield more beans. I then let those beans dry on the vine, and I put them in a big container. I'm like, cool, I've just done math without thinking. Because nature has this inherent wisdom that we don't recognize. It's very good at doing what it does.
Yeah.
And if we spend just a few minutes working with it instead of annihilating it with chemicals, we have a real chance of something better. Even my lawn is clover, and clover is another one of those nitrogen-fixing plants. And in the time that I've had it, it went from clean fill, essentially dead, to being full of life. This is a thing people can do.
Right.
And the question is...
3-minute stations.
3-minute stations.
Well, that's just...
So I keep saying to people, every time I talk to them, why aren't you doing this? Yeah, $50 is expensive up front, but in the long run, what can you yield from this? Like Chet and I talked about this last weekend when we were talking about, my community gardening efforts.
Right.
We harvest a pear tree. My wife and I just found in the woods. Someone just threw a pear away at some point 50 years ago. And we harvest it twice a year because different portions of the tree ripen because of different sun conditions at different times. So twice a year we harvest it, about a month apart. Each time we get 70 pounds of pears.
Really?
So why aren't we doing this? This tree's maybe 20 years old, but it's producing fruit as it grows. Why aren't we doing this? What if everyone in your neighborhood, go talk to your neighbors and say, what if we all did this? What kind of future is possible if we're all just doing this? How much more time could we spend with our families if we're offsetting our food bill with perennial fruit-bearing plants that just do the thing without a ton of maintenance? Obviously, you can do more and make it better.
Right.
I certainly don't. I leave most of my plants unattended, and they just do the thing because that's what they would do regardless of my presence.
Right. Amazing. Hayward Gatch, our friend, and we appreciate some of that information today. Before we run out of time, you've got a little company. Tell everybody about that.
Yeah, so the company is called We specialize in what they call home solutions. It's a deliberately vague title because we like to do a lot of things. We repair houses. We help folks with edible gardening space. We, see something wrong with your house and try to fix it. We look around and inspect the home. And quite often, we end up talking to the homeowners and being something of an impromptu therapy service because everyone seems to be very stressed. And it seems the more we talk to each other, the better things can be.
All right. Good stuff. And look, can they find you where? Where do they find you?
Yeah, so the best place to find me is Facebook. We do have a construction company Facebook page. You can also reach out to me personally. My phone number is... And remember, folks, resistance is fertile.
All right, brother. Thank you. Hayward Gatz. We'll come right back, everybody. Greg Howard next.
Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast episode. This project is done on a DIY basis on extremely antiquated equipment. And if this is something you'd like to hear more of, and maybe you're feeling particularly generous, you can head on over to patreon.com/Auftonomia. That's patreon.com/AFTONOMIA. I'm still looking to figure out what kind of benefits I can offer to any of my subscribers other than my undying gratitude. But if you feel like supporting the show, it would be very helpful. I am a father of 2, husband of 1, trying to provide for my family and do whatever I can to make this world a place I don't have to apologize to those children for. I'd really appreciate any support that happens. Obviously, if you can't, I totally get it. I know how it feels to be up against the wall financially. So thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.
'Cause there's nothing I want more than to sleep under the night sky. The animals as they go about their lives. Feel the fire warm my body, feel the mud under my toes. But tonight this hell keeps me enclosed. For if we don't have our freedom, if we are captured by their iron hands, then the vision for fire, it burns so much more bright. There's no justice in the system, a bigger cage is still a prison. Well, I hope that somewhere someone breaks free tonight.